By bringing developers and security together, you don't have to choose between speed and security. Develop fast, stay secure.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Cloud Security Podcast. This is the ReInforce 2023 recap, which we were there at last week. Shilpi's going to host today, and I'm just going to support.
Yes, I'm going to try and take the reins from Ashish for this one.
And the camera's over there.
Yeah, we've got a weird setup happening for those of you who've been kind of following our journey. We have moved to London just a couple of months ago, and we are getting our gear in dribs and drabs. So that's been interesting, but the show must go on, as they say. So we're here, and we had the good fortune of attending ReInforce and Forward Cloud Sec just this week, just a couple of days ago. So in a true good old fashion, we are back here with a recap episode. We all know how much you guys love the recaps that we do, and thank you for all the support for that. So we thought we'll come back, do this, and kind of share with you, what were the updates, what did we see, and what's in store for us. So just for this episode, just quickly in terms of what to expect. So we will just touch base very quickly in regards to what AWS ReInforce is for anyone who doesn't know what the conference is all about. Go through some of the key announcements. So if you guys are familiar with Apple, at most of these conferences, what happens is people announce, some either good features or something. It's all about the announcements. So AWS ReInforce kind of follows Apple's strategy in regards to that they do try and make some announcements that people will get excited about, and then we'll also talk about some of the key themes that we saw in the keynote amongst the vendors, the speakers, just across the board. What were some of the themes, and how many times did we hear Gen AI?
Also, if you're tuning into the live stream for the first time, or maybe you've done this before, definitely type in any questions you have about the topic for AWS ReInforce into the comment, whether it's on YouTube, like LinkedIn, Twitter, whichever your platform you're joining us from. You can also drop in where you're logging in from as well. So it's always good to know where people are tuning in live from. If you have any questions, drop them in. Even if it's related to cloud security, feel free to drop that in. We can answer those questions. So with that said, let's go into what is AWS ReInforce.
So what is AWS ReInforce? So I think a lot of people may be familiar with reInvent. That is AWS's annual conference that they have. ReInforce was kind of like a spin-off from that, I would say. It is totally focused on cybersecurity, and they have been running that since 2019. But this year's one was the third one, which was in person. So there was one that got canceled because of COVID, another one that went virtual. So this happened to be the third one. The last one was held in Boston, which we happened to be there as well. So that was pretty cool as well. So this one is dedicated fully for security. So you do see people who either work in AWS security, people who are working with AWS security, wanting to learn about AWS security, all of those things. And another thing that does happen around ReInforce often is there's a community event. So I just want to make a quick shout out to Forward Cloud Sec. And I just learned this year that Forward is actually a spin on ReInforce. So there's Forward Cloud Sec. So that's a community nonprofit conference that usually happens the day before. And we also this year got tickets for that. So yay, they are really hard to get tickets for.
Last time we just missed out, but this time they were kind enough to have tickets available in the Australian time zone, which is where we were. So it kind of worked out really well for us to be able to at least have our tickets being available, being attended in person. Last year we ended up doing a watch party because we could not attend. But great event overall, great turnout. We will leave links for the talks for that as well.
Yeah, so there were some really good talks, and we will generate a playlist for them on our YouTube channel, which has actually just hit just over 10K. So I'm really, really happy about that. And thank you for everyone who just kind of made that happen.
Thank you so much for making the 10K happen as well. It was been a long journey, but here's to 10 more after this as well. Maybe a bit more faster than what we did last time.
Yeah, for sure. So so that's AWS ReInforce, basically AWS's security conference. So in regards to, let's get into the key announcements that happened at AWS ReInforce.
How do we want to cover it? So you talk about the announcement, I give the practitioner view.
I think that's a good way to do it. So obviously there are lots of announcements that do happen, but I think what is important for us and for you guys as well is, what does it actually mean when you're working with this? Does this make a big difference? What is it going to mean when you're actually working with your AWS this environment in terms of security controls. So I'm going to kick it off with, so all the announcements were made by Becky Vase for most of the security ones, who's a senior principal engineer at AWS. So the first one that they did mention was the Amazon verified permissions, which is their fine-grained authorization and permissions for the applications that you're building. So they did speak about CEDAR when they were speaking about CEDAR, sorry, when they spoke about the verified permissions. And that is the open source application that the verified permission has actually been built upon. So if you are following the journey, you would have realized that Amazon Verified Access was previewed last year at reInvent. And that was announced for general availability just recently in April. So you've got the verified access that is available. So that is the feature that allows you to secure your applications without the need for a VPN. And what the verified permission does is just gives you that fine-grained authorization, which means that you can kind of make decisions based on, the time, location, and the role of the identities that you've got. So Ashish, how important is this, or what do you think of this announcement? What does it mean?
From a verified permission, for context, for people who use serverless, people would have to use something called a customized authorizer before. So there are two parts to authentication. Authorization or authentication are two parts to anyone logging into a system. First, authentication is to verify, yes, this is Ashish. Authorization is to verify whether Ashish should be able to access whatever this service is. Now, it's a second component which they're trying to say that if you are building this custom at the moment, you are able to use verified permissions to do this. Now, based on the conversations on the floor and going through some of the workshops and conversations in general, now CEDAR, the open source policy engine, for lack of a better comparison, it is pretty good. It uses mathematical calculation to determine whether something is accurately letting you know whether something is too permissive or not enough permissive. Now, having said that, I would not say people should jump ahead and replace all their customized or all their custom authorizers from Lambda functions with a verified permission. I would still give it a few more, I guess, because for lack of a better word, if you're starting today, maybe it's worthwhile having a look at it. But if you haven't worked on the custom authorizer before, then I would say just wait it out a bit and see what happens at the beginning, because there would still be some learnings to come out as with any GA product that goes out first. So that's what I would call out. And probably if you're already a fan of verified access, you might actually enjoy verified permission as well. So that's what I'm calling out.
If you've been using it since April. It hasn't been around for long. It got announced at reInvent.
reInvent? April.
No, so verified access got announced in preview at reInvent. It became GA in April. So thank you. So they're all rolling in slowly, but as you can see, there is that whole focus on access and permission and verifying them. Speaking about GA, so I think a running thing that you would actually see as we speak through is a lot of things did become GA that were either announced in preview at reInforce last year or reInvent. So that's good. Like, more things are becoming available to all of us. The other thing was Amazon EC2 Connect endpoint also became GA. So which means that you can now connect your SSH and your RDP to your EC2 instances without the use of the IP addresses. So that means you can have strong auth before reaching a host. You can single click connect to your EC2 management console. Your Cloud Trail logs can be it can be fully auditable with your Cloud Trail logs, and also there is support for third-party SSH tools. So in terms of what does that translate into for a practitioner? How important is this? Does this excite you?
So for context, for people, a lot of people who probably work with EC2 instances, especially in enterprise, you'll realize that one of the biggest challenges, because most Amazon network is on the internet. By that, what I mean is, even if you have an EC2 instance in a private subnet, because you're not in the Amazon network, you have to come from the internet onto your security group, which is blocked, which is basically limited to your private IP address to be able to access an EC2 instance with SSH keys and RDPs and all of that. Now, they did call out, if you're using SSM, like System Manager, that's great. This is almost like better. They're calling it better than the System Manager as well. So worthwhile looking into. But the goal over here is that you should be able to use a private endpoint to be able to hit the EC2 instances that you're in. Now, haven't really experimented with this to know whether we need to use Direct Connect. You should have a Direct Connect into AWS already for it, or a VPN. How would they enable it? But it would be interesting to see as more people start using it, whether it comes out. So I guess what should be called out, where you don't really need to have a public IP address to access your EC2 instance anymore. So we can maybe get rid of the NAT gateway if you have to, but we'll find out.
We'll find out. Moving on, Amazon Guard Duty. So one service that does often get a lot of love during Reinforce, and we saw that last year as well, is Amazon Guard Duty. Now, for those of you who don't know what it is just their threat detection service. Now, that got agentless malware protection last year, if you remember, to Reinforce 2022. This year, we got to see 3 different updates to it. So now threat detection is also available for Amazon Aurora. So that is their relationship database engine. Also, EKS Runtime threat detection was available as well now, and also threat detection coverage. So, just that threat detection landscape is being expanded, and there are more services that are being linked together with that. I think it is a good thing. Obviously, we know EKS is something that is being adopted more and more, and we have covered that quite extensively on our podcast.
I think I would also add, because Runtime was not really available earlier, so this is definitely a good addition. But I think, as everything else that we have seen with Guard Duty, there was no mention of whether there would be less false positive. So you might still have to fine tune the Amazon Guard Duty as you kind of go through it. Even if new features doesn't really mean it's a bad thing. I think it's still a good thing. It just means that anything which is from a cloud native perspective, you should be able to have almost like a real-time visualization of it. And I say near real-time with quotes in the air, but you would still have to fine-tune it. So I'll probably take that as a welcoming news with a pinch of salt.
We all like a bit of pinch of salt.
Yeah.
So the other one, obviously, things that, I guess with security services, the 3 things that you'll always hear about is Guard Duty, Inspector, and Detective. So those are the 3 ones that we hear quite a bit about. So the next one was Amazon Inspector. Last year, Amazon Inspector did not get too many updates at reInvent or at Reinforce. But this year, what they have introduced is code scan for their Lambda function. So which means now you can start to detect injection flaws, data leaks. If you've got a weak cryptography or any missing encryption, you will be able to detect all of those things in your code with this functionality.
Yeah, I think this is good, because traditionally, I would say this is kind of like the area where it goes into the whole DevSecOps as well. And I would love to hear all the 50 people who are live on right now, whether you think this is a good service or any of the things that we've called out over here are anything you would use yourself or what you're doing for it currently. From a Lambda scanning perspective, I think people traditionally would have gone down the path of using a product like Sneak or another one, just to see if there are any dependencies or injection flaws or SAST as well, or if it's missing an encryption. Now, all of that technically should be checked by Amazon Inspector as well, which is interesting, because Amazon Inspector was traditionally used for searching vulnerabilities in your images that were used for virtual servers as well as your containers. Now, expanding that to Lambda code scanning also means that they're going further into the vulnerability management product suite. They're expanding what can be done in the Amazon Inspector. But what this also means for people who have watched the DevSecOps and Cloud video on our YouTube channel, or even on the podcast episode as well, they're also trying to merge or blur the lines between infrastructure vulnerability versus your code vulnerability management, if you want to use that as a word. And so that is definitely a step towards the path where cloud security and application security are slowly kind of converging. I look at this as like one of the first few steps for that as well.
Yeah, and funnily enough, as we go through this, you might just start to see a theme of that as well, because I think there's a few more announcements that are of the same vein, if I were to use that word. The other, I guess, word I think I would be very surprised if many people on this call actually don't know this, but was SBomb. So for anyone who doesn't know what SBomb is, software bill of materials, pretty much it is what goes into your code. It was mandated that, people should start sharing what, goes into your software in the US. They kind of, mandated it through the government. And there has been a lot of talk, a lot of products, a lot of innovation happening in that space, like how different vendors are looking at sort of providing SBomb, how do you utilize it, all of that. To that vein, and I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think this is the first sort of SBomb specific thing Amazon has released. So they have released Amazon Inspector SBomb Export, which means that you can automatically and centrally manage your SBomb exports. So that means you can export your SBombs with just one click. You can store all your exports into your Amazon S3, and also you can use what they're referring to as Athena or QuickPoint, maybe to query and gain insights. In terms of what those insights would be or what they would look like, I'd be really keen to know, because I think one of the conversations that has been happening over the last year is that everyone has SBombs. What do you do with it? Even if you can analyze it, what is the real value of the information? So I'm actually really personally very curious about this, gaining insight, and I'd love to see sort of what that would mean. But any thoughts there, Ashish?
I definitely have a few thoughts there. I think the first couple of things that I want to call out is that fortunately, because we have media for AWS as well, so we got a one-on-one session with CJ Moses, who's the CISO of AWS. We asked a question around, like, now traditionally SBomb is supposed to be, if I were to use a grocery list example, it's the ingredients of an item you would have purchased. So if you're making bread, flour, and whatever else you use to make bread, I don't know how to make it, but if you want to make it, you probably know what the ingredients are. So SBomb is supposed to be that ingredient list for that product. Now, what they're saying is the SBomb export that they have is an SBomb export of the Amazon component from their side, not your application component. And when I asked the question around the fact that whether this would cover the application as well, or is there plans to extend it to the application, they said they'll come back to us. We haven't had an answer yet, but I think when we do, we'll probably come back and share it with you guys. But that was an interesting one to call out, whether this is this is a step in the good direction, because it is, for people in the US, it is definitely something that is passed on as a presidential, act that the Joe Biden kind of came out and said it is a requirement and it is going to happen and be implemented. So having an export feature is definitely good. You can use the export in S3 to do a lot more things and attach it to make your own custom dashboards. But I'm pretty sure people who are partners would come up with an easier way to show exports of SBomb from Amazon onto their existing channels as well. So it'll be interesting to see what the partners end up doing. But for the moment, I think it's a good release, especially for people who are in the regulated industry who have to abide by the requirement for SBomb.
Yeah, and I think it'll be truly valuable for people who are probably primarily in AWS environment, because obviously with any features that any of the cloud providers release, one of the challenges is always that it will cater to their own cloud primarily. So if you're in a multi-cloud environment, obviously this would not completely help you. You might still need an external tool. Moving on to that whole thing of Ashish was talking about, the whole infrastructure and codes thing. So there was Amazon Code Whisperer, which you guys probably would remember from ReInforce and reInvent from ReInforce last year, and it was made generally available in April this year. So that was something that would help you to generate code suggestions in real time. You could flag codes that resemble open source training data, and also you could scan code to find difficult to find vulnerabilities. Now they've layered that on with the announcement of a new service called Amazon Code Guru. Now that is still in preview at the moment, but what it says is what Amazon Code Guru is going to be able to do is identify, resolve code vulnerabilities at any stage of the development workflow. The concept of this, Ashish, I don't think is something that is new. I think we've heard of a lot of products that do this, but what are your initial thoughts of this? Obviously, Code Whisperer, I know when it sort of initially got announced in preview, it was interesting. Like, that was an interesting play, and I think now they're going, I feel, a layer further into this. But what does this mean from a practitioner lens?
I think I'll probably say, I don't know about the popularity of this one yet, because I don't know, at least in terms of the conversations we've had on the podcast, we haven't heard a lot of people use Code Guru or Code Guru Security for that matter. With the reason, and Code Whisperer, the reason for this, if you think about, if you're starting today and probably are a Amazon first shop, then maybe using it. But traditional organizations that are enterprise banks and companies that have been there for a long time, they already have these tools covered. So for them to migrate onto this, I think maybe a bit challenging, but I think moving forward, you would see a lot of startups and people who want to be challenged by the fact that, hey, I want my developer to know beforehand whether what they're typing in has a vulnerability and it should be stopped. Like a lot of people would compare this to something like a GitHub Copilot as well, which kind of goes to the extent of creating the code as well as having some kind of sanitization onto the code as well. So that would be really interesting, whether the code generation and the code suggestion part and the scanning vulnerabilities, if they're false positive, it's in preview, so we don't have access to it. So it'll be interesting to see whether the traditional problems with integrating a security solution into a development workflow, if that's usually prone to have a lot of false positives. So it'll be interesting to see actually what happens this time as well. But once it becomes GA, maybe at reInvent, we'll find out.
Yeah. So in all fairness, as to what she said, we haven't really spoken to many people who are using this prolifically yet. But in all fairness, obviously, CodeGuru Security just got announced in preview, and Code Whisperer has only been GA since April, so it hasn't really been around for that long. But it'll be interesting to see, by the time reInvent comes around, like what changes we start to see in adoption levels as well. Next, moving on, as you know, I did speak about Inspector, Guard Duty, and Detective. So onto Detective, they made finding groups in Amazon Detective generally available as well. And this is just, sort of and if for those of you who don't know what Amazon Detective is, it is just their service that kind of combines AWS Cloud Trail, VPC, flow logs, and Amazon Guard Duty. So basically, when something goes wrong, all these services kind of bring up all these datas, and Amazon Detective is kind of like a real detective, tries to put the pieces together. So now you can also find groups in this service as well.
Yeah, well, I think the problem was because you had to translate all these logs initially yourself and identify what does this really mean from an Amazon Detective perspective. Now they've combined 3 services, and now you can basically, thanks to machine learning, hopefully some good machine learning and some graph theory, you should be able to get a meaningful answer from the combination of these logs as well. Again, something to watch out for. It's only been released recently, and only time would tell whether. I think maybe I probably want to put another thing over here, that as we kind of talk about these releases, one aim over here for us, at least in this episode, is to call out what's being released. But what you also find is, because a lot of these services are new and have not been used by a lot of people, and the traditional organizations that have been there for a long time would take some time to use these services. So I would not expect everyone to straight away jump onto these things. Like, for example, one of the services that I definitely feel people would jump onto straight away is the Amazon EC2 connection and connect endpoint, because that has been a problem for a long time and people have a lot of custom solutions for it. So I definitely see that possibly being tested quite often. I think we spoke to a few people who have multiple ways to connect onto the servers. Some people lose keys. There's a lot bigger problem to solve over there. So I feel like in everything that we've spoken about so far, that could be the number one thing that people would start using. So maybe by reInvent, you would hear us talk more about that as well, as we get to hear more feedback.
But we even may have a guest talking about that as well, as we have more AWS episodes.
Yeah, actually, we'll have a few guests to talk about what we are covering over here as well. So
so AWS month, Amazon month. AWS month is running on the podcast as well. So we do have a few interesting episodes lined up. We will be, sort of talking about not so much the announcements, but how people are using AWS and making sure that the AWS environment is secure.
Yeah.
The last announcement was around the AWS KMS or Key Management Service. Now they've just added a additional layer of security. So initially it used to be single layer. Now they have a dual layer of encryption for this.
Specifically for AWS Re.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I was going to say not for as in KMS.
Yeah.
It's specifically for the Amazon S3 bucket service. They've added dual layer server-side encryption.
Mm-hmm.
It is server-side encryption has always been there, available as a KMS feature for people who have been using KMS. But now they've added a double encryption as well. So something for people to look out for.
Perfect. So those are all the announcements. Obviously, if we have missed anything, please do pop that into any of the chat streams that you're a part of, or also if there's any ones that you're really, really excited about, Let us know ones that you're disappointed about, or you wish that there was an announcement. Any of that, plug that into the conversation. And it's always good to talk about how these things ended up. Just as we progress on, I guess we wanted to dedicate the next bit of the episode to just talk about like some key themes that we were thinking.
Before we go into the theme, we actually have a question. So for some reason, the questions are not appearing on the screen, but so that's why I was just checking in over here. So hey, Dipesh, thanks for I guess the claps. Inosh has a question. Inosh Alter has a question. What is AWS Global Partner Security Initiative? So the brief intro that they gave us about the partner initiative, at least on the stage, was the fact that they're working closely with partners to deliver a lot more security for their customers. Because for Amazon, security is two-pronged. One is security of the cloud, which they already are doing and they talk about. The second one was on how to help customers do security better. And the initiative over there, Inosh, was the fact that how do we work closely with our partners to be able to deliver more security for our customers and educate them or help them implement. So hopefully we'll get to hear a lot more as partners kind of talk about it a bit more. I think they only had 4 or 5 partners. I think they kind of and these are big companies like Accenture, KPMG, PwC. Don't quote me on this. I'm pretty sure there were definitely only a handful of people who were partnering. But as it expands into a broader network, you probably see a lot of consulting companies jumping into the partnership as well. So hopefully that answers the question, but feel free to ask a follow-up as well if you like. Thank you for the question. And Roderick, oh, hey, Roderick, how are you, man? Good to see you again. Roderick basically said, I agree, the EC2 endpoint service will be used. I definitely believe so as well. I think most of the conversation we had over there was around the fact that, oh, yeah, I have had this problem for a long time, and I can't wait for people to try it out and see if we can replace our existing hacky solution with something better. So thank you for those questions and keep them coming. We're happy to keep answering them as well.
Yeah. Perfect. I was just going to say to the partner initiative as well, something that I remember in terms of conversations we had with a few people is I think there was that reference made for iPhone marketplace. And I think that is kind of like the thinking behind it is, how many...
Oh, we made the recommendation.
Did we make the analogy? Yeah, okay. So the one person that I think Ashish might have been the one, but I think that's probably like the kind of analogy that you can draw is, Apple normally only onboards apps and things when they know that they're secure, and it's just that ecosystem becomes secure as a whole. So I think that is kind of like thinking behind this security partner initiative, where it's about working together to make sure that the end user is getting services and applications that are secure.
Right. I think the way I would explain it, and this is what I told CJ Moses. Yes, I had this conversation with CJ Moses before the go-kart we did, and she'll talk about go-kart as well. So the way I explained it to him, and I think everyone who's listening to this or watching this would relate to this as well. Amazon is the equivalent of the Apple iPhone. So if you were to imagine Apple is Amazon, and Amazon has a product called AWS. Apple has a product called iPhone. Now, iPhone has an app store for people who use iPhone, but Android also has a marketplace where you can download and work with any application they want. They want to be a lot more like Apple App Store, where every application that is put in is verified by their marketplace. It's actually the partners that they talk about. That is the security competency, operation competency. There's all these competencies that they talk about. How is that being vetted for? And how do they go through the process of making sure the partners are the right ones that they can recommend to customers and all of that? So the way I would describe it is that your AWS is your iPhone, and the App Store or the marketplace for Android is basically the partner network that they're trying to create, where the partners can join in and start working with AWS closely to deliver services for the customers of who the iPhone users are, or the AWS users are, or the Android users. So that was the analogy. He definitely clicked onto it, and hopefully remembers it when we talk next.
That was a good one. Yeah. Sorry, I remember someone saying that. I didn't realize it was just you. Speaking, I think this kind of goes very well and into the next segue, which is the key theme. So as Ashish mentioned, we did get an opportunity to actually meet with the CISO of AWS, CJ Moses. We actually went go-karting with him, which was really fun. And he's actually a racing enthusiast, which we didn't know, but he was really humble and sort of, made it a fair game for everyone.
He's won a few championships. Let's just say that. This is like national level championships for racing cars. So yeah, he was quite humble about, I do say I did beat him by 1 second, and he did acknowledge it. So I'm gonna take that as a win and go. Okay,
maybe he was just. I think he was just trying to be nice.
I think so as well.
You will never know.
Yeah, I think because to be fair, there were a lot of people on the track, and I'll stop talking about this after that. But there were a lot of people on the track while him and I were on the track as well, trying to do go-kart, trying to get a good score. But I'm pretty sure if it was just him, he would have done a much better score than what we got. And for people who are enthusiast car races, or at least enjoy that part, you realize the no surprise, the person who got the fastest was the lightest among all of us. So there you go. All right, go back to the theme.
Yeah, enough about go-karting. So as Ashish said, one of the main themes, and they started off the keynote by saying security is our top priority. It was in bold letters, and that was the first big slide that came up. And it shouldn't be really a surprise in a dedicated AWS security conference that that is something that they would call out. They also spoke about the shared responsibility model, and now this is something that gets brought up a lot in cloud security. And they made a reference to the fact that how do you kind of describe the security shared responsibility model? And I guess we often have conversations with our guests and with our peers around okay, where is that line of where does the responsibility stop and finish? So it was interesting that CJ Moses called out saying that AWS looks after the security of the cloud, whereas the customers should be looking after the security in the cloud. Now, off the cloud and in the cloud, I guess you guys can kind of think about what that means. They also kind of threw some stats in terms of what some of, I guess, achievements that they've had in terms of things they've been able to prevent. So just in Q1 of 2023, they said that they mitigated about 1 million outbound botnet-driven DDoS attacks, and also stopped about 1.5 billion signals from active network probes. I think it just probably gives you a reference in terms of the large network that AWS is, and the number of customers that use it. So the scale of the attacks that or the security that we have to do is quite large. So those numbers kind of give us a perception of the scale of things. Given obviously it's 2023, and as the keynote started, and especially because previously we've had Google Cloud's not Google Cloud Security Summit actually also happened around the same time. So it actually happened on June 13, which is exactly the same time that AWS ReInforce happened. And in saying that, initially I think we were planning to cover parts of it at the end of this episode, but we realized that it might become a really long episode. So we will include a summary of, I guess, everything we're talking about in our cloud security newsletters. So if you aren't signed up for that, it is a weekly newsletter that we send out. It's free. And what we do is we include, different bits and pieces, any relevant news. It would be summary and key takeaways from our episodes, any things we are seeing in out there in the market with our conversations. So it's really just sort of a lot of cloud security information and extra bits and pieces. So it complements the podcast really well. So if you haven't signed up for that,
so the value add for yourself, and the website is www.cloudsecurity.newsletter.com.
Yeah.
Kept it simple this time.
Yeah.
And
because you know how great we are with naming things.
Yeah, so that's why we call it cloudsecurity.newsletter.com. But the one thing that I want to call out, the reason we kind of had to have a newsletter, because there's a lot more that goes into each of the episodes, and there are these announcements that are coming out from cloud security providers, or at least cloud service providers, on an ongoing basis. So our attempt of the cloud security newsletter is that it's your, if for lack of a better word, it's your less than 10-minute read of what's happening in the week of cloud security around the world. And I guess we've kept that as a thing that we want to encourage more people to kind of join in. So if you are someone who enjoys newsletters, definitely go and check out the website for cloudsecurity.newsletter.com. It would also have some of our bootcamp that goes on, which is the cloud security bootcamp that we run on cloudsecuritybootcamp.com. But that's all.
Yeah. And so what we'll do is we will include sort of our analysis of what we're seeing in Google Cloud security versus AWS in the newsletter, but also we will be running a AMA, the cloud security office hours that we run every week as well. So that will also be around, stuff that we've seen in ReInforce and Google Cloud.
Because we love talking about cloud security so much, we talk about it all day, every day.
All day in different forms. So anyway, so that was just a little sort of a mention about that. But yes, going back to Gen AI. So I was expecting a lot. I actually expected that this the keynote will just be Gen AI for the first like 10, 15 minutes. But to their credit, and maybe it was a bit refreshing, because even though as much as I have enjoyed the progress of Gen AI and everything that it's doing for, technology, innovation, and all of that, it was good just to have focus on other things as well. So CJ Moses did mention Gen AI once in the first half an hour, 45 minutes of the talk. I actually did have a Gen AI counter running as well, because I thought that'd be hilarious. But he didn't actually mention it until later, much later in the keynote, just towards the end, 15 minutes. And I think what they made reference to is that for Amazon and AWS, AI and generative AI and machine learning is not something new. They've obviously been using it in the background for many things. So it's not something that is brand new for them. He made reference to how we can use large language models, which is kind of what ChatGPT is based on, if you are using that to to do good for security, to be able to scale security. We actually are running a special series on generative AI and AI security. So we have released the first episode already, and if you haven't checked it out, go check it out. And there's 2 more episodes coming out for that as well shortly. So you will get to hear about AI security from a cloud perspective from us in different forms as well.
By the way, I just want to say shout out to Roderick for subscribing to Cloud Security newsletter as well.
Oh, amazing. Thank you for that, Roderick. So they made mention of that. I think there were no new sort of ML or AI announcements specifically, but he did make mention of Amazon Bedrock. So that kind of got announced in April. So in April, they brought out this Amazon Bedrock. You guys may have already heard about it. It is just their service that allows you to sort of be able to build and scale your Gen AI applications using foundational models. And the foundational models that these are linking back to are your AI 21 labs, Anthropic, Stability AI, if you've heard about them, and also Amazon Titan, which is Amazon's own high-performing foundational model. So those are the things. It wasn't specifically announced at ReInforce, but they just kind of made mention of this as well. There were also talks around this. So there was a specific talk from AWS around how to deploy generative AI securely, application securely with AWS. So that was just, so they are covering it. I don't think we heard too much about Gen AI at the conference.
But I would definitely say that the conversation was floating more around the fact that they have been doing AI and machine learning for a long time. And obviously they had to change a lot of the conversations that they were doing internally before November. And for people who've been following the AI conversations, November is when ChatGPT got announced, and that basically blew up. And I think I definitely would give credit to Amazon and everyone else who's joining in. They all are calling out that, even including Google is calling out that they have been using machine learning for a long time, but things like ChatGPT has democratized the availability of this for your common person. And that also means that people who are usually not the kind who would go for AI and machine learning, now they're able to access it, they're learning it. What that means is now things would have been like, say, 6 years in the future are happening right now. In terms of how generative AI is changing. A lot more organizations are looking at how can we use generative AI in our organization, and this is kind of where your Bedrock and all the other things that all the other providers are doing comes in, just so that people can make their own LLMs, which comes with its own challenges, as we've been kind of seeing with our AI security consulting calls that we've been doing. But I think it's definitely something, it's just the right direction for putting an anchor in the future where, hey, if we should do something about generative AI, so we can maximize the potential right now as people are running gearing up for it.
Yep. Definitely. As they say, with great power comes great responsibility. And I think Gen AI is just
quoting Spider-Man. That's pretty good.
As you do. It's got nothing to do with the fact that we did go to Disneyland. But so I think that's where AI is. I think, for lack of a better word, I think it is trending at the moment. But a lot of people in the background have been working quite closely with LLMs and Gen AI. But so that was the mention for that. There was also this mention of, and I think we haven't heard this word very often. I think it has been sort of coming through in little fits and spurts here and there, is that shift from ransomware to wiperware. So now, for those of you who are not familiar with the shift, ransomware, as you would have been aware, where there's obviously when someone holds a bit of information and they are holding you to ransom for financial gains, or it could be just to extort you for something. that's normally what has happened in cybersecurity, that people would sort of gain credentials or get a bit of information and they would extort you for different things. Now, what we're starting to see, and probably more so in the last couple of years with the whole Ukraine-Russia war, there's also a lot of wiperware, which means that there is cybersecurity attacks that are happening just purely for the intention of destruction and wiping out information. So there is that shift, which can be in certain sense, more sort of scary, because there's not something that you can give to sort of be able to mitigate some of that risk. So there was that conversation around that, and that shift in what Amazon is seeing.
One of the reasons why they called it out was because they already have a service around this, which is and so they have an AWS backup service which has a lifecycle policy, but specifically the service that was called out in their backup for this was something called AWS Backup Vault Lock, and people were quite excited. And what we'll do is we'll also punch in the interview for the product manager for that particular product space. She was quite excited about how it's kind of changing and what it means. So you'll hear from her right now. I guess in the post-processing part. But I would also call out that the differentiator over here is like, instead of a regular backup where you have a lifecycle policy, but you can technically say, hey, don't do anything to this for 1 year, but I can technically pull out the information if I want to. What the vault lock does is that you can say a lifecycle policy for 1 year, and for that 1 year, it's like a fixed deposit. You can't change anything. Basically, it remains as it is for 1 year. By hook or by crook, Amazon maintains them and makes sure that nothing can happen to that data for the next 1 year that has been set as a lifecycle policy. Which, if you bring back to wiperware, if someone has wiped off your data, and if they tried wiping your backup as well, they wouldn't be able to do it because there would be a protection for it. But I don't know.
It's like you've put your treasures in a lock and locked it away and thrown away the key.
That is pretty much what they're calling it. So, I mean, it is definitely something positive, I think. But I say, again, a lot of people have had traditional softwares used for backup before, which is already outside of your AWS environment in most scenarios. Because I think for people who are in the banking or regulated industry would understand this, that you probably do not want to have your data and the backup at the same place. You want to have it separately. So a lot of people may already have had some solutions, but if you don't have one, definitely check out the one from Amazon. I did want to also give a shout out to Rajiv as well. It was great to meet you, man. Rajiv just called out Gen AI is a net positive for security, and I 100% agree with that.
Amen to that. Anything that can help us do things faster, quicker,
and better,
and
secure,
secure at the same time is definitely a positive thing. We just have to probably figure it out
yes,
together for sure. I think the other thing that we heard about, and I think this is another buzzword, is zero trust. So zero trust, obviously, last couple of years, if you've been anywhere around cybersecurity, you have probably heard zero trust. It's the notion, and again, one of those things that the US government kind of kicked off. All organizations should be aiming towards zero trust. What is zero trust? Zero trust, basically, for those of you who are not quite familiar with it, is just this notion of the fact that you trust nothing, or you trust as little as possible, and you're verifying. Like, trust but verify is something that gets said quite often.
Yeah. I think we just want to add to that, because when we had the conversation with CJ Moses as well, and this is good, valuable for people. So he said traditionally, to what shall be called out, people would say trust but verify, but the zero trust conversation is more around verify then trust. That's basically what you're trying to say from zero trust. Basically, you need to be able to verify that, yes, this is Ashish, and yes, he's authority to access something. Mm-hmm. Then you start trusting that, yes, Ashish at this particular level of authentication authorization, we can trust him. Which I thought was an interesting shift, and probably you would start seeing a lot of that from the messaging that you would see from AWS. And I wonder, like everything else, if Azure and Google would start copying it as well. But I think it was a good one to describe the differentiation between what security is usually using, that, hey, trust but verify, but now we're kind of shifting, we're just turning it on its head and saying verify then trust if you want to do zero trust. So
and I think one of the things that they called out, and I think this is something that we've spoken to a lot of people about, is like, well and good, we know what zero trust is, everyone would love to have zero trust, but in real applications or real organizations, how are you going to sort of implement it? What does it actually mean? How do you start with it? How do you implement it? And the conversations that they were happening, like, we know two real life and very applicable things for zero trust is the data perimeter and the whole notion of identity. So there were calls made for that as well, and that's something that AWS is focusing on. In terms of that, obviously there were lots of talks around that as well, around sort of data perimeters and identity still being really important pillars. Identity with Gen AI, and obviously as we are shifting to different things, is as important as ever. You would have, I know Ashish and I speak about this quite often, and Ashish actually started his career in identity. It is just one of those things that you would think is the simplest pillar, but I think this is probably one of the most complex things when it comes to cloud security.
Yeah. People spend years in identity and access management, and I think there are only a handful of products that do really well. Otherwise, you probably see people making custom solutions. But I'll call out this. I think identity. We did a poll a few weeks ago. In the poll we did a few weeks ago, we asked a question about what's the biggest problem that people face in AWS, and most people called out AWS IAM was that thing that frustrated them like anything. So to the point that now, because some of the consulting gigs we do are around IAM review outside of the whole cloud security assessment, which is really another interesting one. But it is a very complex topic. As easy as it for us to think that it is just username, password, it's a lot more than that.
Yeah, and just reflecting back to the announcements that we spoke about, verified access, verified permission, it's the whole identity story that people are just trying to make it more and more secure. The other thing that we spoke about, I think if you just were following along from RSA and the DevSecOps pieces that we were doing, has been this whole notion of security being baked in from beginning. If you remember our recap from last year, and it's still available on all different sources. So if you want to do a bit of a recap, you can go watch and listen to that. But there was a huge emphasis on this whole notion of security needs to be baked in from beginning. They spoke about the Security Guardian, which is AWS's security championship program. There was that whole conversation, and DevSecOps has obviously been quite important in regards to that. So in this ReInforce as well, that conversation is still ongoing. So it didn't happen in the first 10-15 minutes of the keynote, but they were still talking about this. They were saying, how do we, secure millions of lines of codes, which is what we are dealing with at the moment as an ecosystem. They spoke about the service team and Guardian being part of the AppSec review process. And also, as part of the keynote, there was Delta Airlines CISO Debbie Wheeler, and she spoke about that for her organization. The whole notion of shifting left has been really, really important. So that was something interesting. Obviously, DevSecOps in cloud and in the world of AI is still very relevant. And we did actually recently do a video and an interview, multiple interviews around this topic, which is again available on on YouTube and on our podcast links as well. So do check it out. I thought it was really interesting because we genuinely actually went out with the question of, is DevSecOps still relevant?
Or are we just basically making it up ourselves as well? But that was, I would definitely say that we are far away from being, I guess, DevSecOps where it's all combined. But we would get there ultimately. Slowly, as organizations mature, you probably start seeing that a lot more security guarding conversations keep coming up. We've got a question from Avinash around how ChatGPT and other tools will impact cloud security professional role, how organizations are reacting to such tools as data is not practice to share. You're doing awesome. Thank you, Avinash. Thank you for the question. So I would probably talk about, so we have been doing a lot of at least AI security consulting, where a lot of CISOs are talking about ChatGPT and other generative AI tools that they're using in their organization. Now, what we have found in the conversation so far has been that majority ended up updating their usability policy, which is for people who work in an enterprise context, you would have had an agreement you would have signed with your organization saying that, hey, this is what we consider as an acceptable usage policy. Now, if you want to Google that term, that's pretty awesome. Just do that as well. But essentially what that means is, as an organization or as an employee, you are agreeing to the terms and conditions of the employer that you would follow this. And most people have updated their acceptable use policy to say that, hey, either you can use ChatGPT and other generative AI tools, or you cannot. But if the option is you can, they are calling it out that you cannot use any of the proprietary data of the organization in there. So from a cloud security professional perspective, I see this as two parts. One is you can improve the code that you're trying to write. You can learn faster. And we've done multiple videos on this as well, which I highly recommend to check out. If you have any I guess, additional topics that you would want us to cover for this as well, feel free to drop them as well. But ChatGPT for Cloud Security Professional has two sides. I kind of agree with Rajiv saying it's still a net positive. Positive from a learning perspective, positive from a being able to fix your code faster perspective, hopefully without any passwords saved in there, because you don't know what the algorithm is doing. But also from the other perspective, if you have I guess an organization where you want to encourage the use of acceptable use, the use of generative AI in your as a tool, or you're building a language model, then having knowledge about how the bedrock at AWS, how to secure these, how to secure LLMs, which is their language model systems, large language model systems as well. Those are definitely going to be key. So what this means, I think a lot of people are calling out that generative AI, the explosion of the popularity of it is very similar to cloud, but this one is on steroids, and people are still talking about AI. I don't think I have a day where someone is not talking about how to use AI and cybersecurity to find jobs, to build your resume better, and to make yourself a better engineer, but also on the other side to improve productivity overall. But with the asterisk sign of do not put anything proprietary in there as well. Yeah. Even if you are not using it for a company, I would still encourage you not to put information that you think is proprietary. There are many ways to go around this, and without making sure that your secrets are being put into a model which you don't know. I think I saw a video or a tweet of someone who was able to make ChatGPT print out Windows keys for people who know that, your activation key for your Windows. They got like 10 activation keys, and some of them worked as well. So that was a bit scary, because ChatGPT uses Microsoft Azure in the background. So I wonder if there's actually language models that are being used by ChatGPT that allows it to have. Now, I don't know if it was Photoshop, but look pretty real. So yeah, there's definitely things that we haven't even experienced yet so far that are going to come out of it. But hopefully that answers your question, Avinash, but feel free to ask another one on YouTube or LinkedIn, wherever you find them. Thanks for that question.
Amazing. Now, just to wrap up the last couple of things. So Amazon Security Lake, now that is something that did get announced in reInvent last year, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But that is something, security lakes, I think now will become even more and more important. And you'll start to talk about this because of all this like massive amount of data that we are dealing with, working with. So there was a lot of conversation around Amazon Security Lake, also at AWS ReInforce. There was a chalk talk that happened, which talked about the fact that, you've created a data lake, you're ingesting all this data, but how are you going to use that data to be able to gain insights and what's happening in your organization? There was also a talk about, how different organizations are kind of using Amazon Security Lake, using things like, post analytics and ML tools to get insights from the data. So that will be quite interesting to see how that develops now. And to your point, as Avinash, quick, and thanks. He said that was a quick and crisp one. Thank you. So to your point, that the Gen AI space, things like Security Lake are becoming more and more important.
Again, on the Gen AI space, at least from a partnership perspective, they didn't have, so from an Amazon Security Lake, they didn't have a lot of partners to talk about. I think they only had 5 again. Because the service is fairly still new and they're trying to promote it, so you probably start seeing your Amazon reps trying to promote that with you, that you should use Security Lake, you should use all these services, which, by the way, is expected that every time a new service is announced, everyone who's an Amazon employee would ask you to just follow it. And nothing against them. I think it's a good thing, because they want more people to use it so they get some feedback and they can improve it. But I would say that at least in the announcement, they called out, I think they had 5 partners who were working with them, or only a few of them were working with, not a lot. So just something to be mindful of, because you may jump onto the Security Lake or any of the new services, as I called out earlier, but you may already have a solution that allows you to do this already. So you may want to consider using or improving your existing solution before you jump onto a new service from Amazon. And again, this is a unbiased opinion. This is what most professionals would do as well. Yep, it's great to have a service. If you were considering to replace an existing service because you're unhappy with it, definitely look into it as well.
Yeah. Again, it's just like you have to see, I think with any cybersecurity solution, you always have to see, what's within my organization, what are my priorities, what do I already have running. So if you're already, heavily using, say, Amazon Guard Duty, and any of these updates kind of really resolves, a pain point that you have, definitely that makes sense. But it is just kind of opening up it's like, should I liken it to maybe a buffet? You go, there's lots of things available and there's new additions to things, but is it exactly what is it that you need?
But the rule for buffet is don't go for soup first. So
I don't know what that translates into an Amazon world, but anyway.
Which is basically, and don't go for an MVP first. Go for the full menu if you can.
Sure. That's a new one. I know you got it. You heard it first here. Like Amazon ReInforce, the soup analogy. Looking forward, obviously, with all of these conferences, there's always this notion of looking forward, and I think one thing that they mentioned was this whole notion of quantum computing. So many of you may not be familiar with it, or some of you might be quite familiar with it. Quantum computing is this future thinking computing, which is going to be very powerful, be able to do a lot of things. I think Ashish kind of mentioned it also in his 5-minute recap, which quick shout out if you want to just get a 5-minute version of all the updates. Ashish actually launched a 5-minute video, which is there on YouTube and on our socials. So do check that out if you want to sort of recap everything, but only want to spend 5 minutes. Ashish in his usual
Sure, we can put that as a podcast episode as well. Yeah,
would you like to listen to a 5-minute podcast episode? My thoughts, maybe not, but you can prove me wrong if you want it.
You can definitely prove her wrong by giving it more listens than the actual thing, but I'll let you be the judge of it.
Attention span is a thing these days. But speaking of quantum computing, so to give you an idea of scale and something that CJ Moses called out, currently, if you want to decrypt an RSA key, it can take up to 300 trillion years to do that. So that's a lot long. But if quantum computing does become something that is quite real and accessible, it would only take you one day to be able to do that. So that means, obviously, the whole paradigm of cybersecurity will completely shift if this were to become something that's very real and accessible. And what they called out there is that there's things that Amazon and AWS are doing, like working with different organizations, looking at different tools, open source tools, on how will they mitigate the post-quantum world, as they called it. So that was just something to sort of have at the back of your mind. Not something that we need to worry about right now, but it's good to hear that that Amazon and AWS are forward thinking about this. So that was pretty much all the
updates,
key themes, announcements, what we saw in terms of all the attendance. So last year, there was a blog post that went out which said like ReInforce had about 6,000 attendees. This year, the blog post yet hasn't come out. So when it does, we'll know, how well it was attended. Last year, it was in Boston. This year, it was in Anaheim, California. They have not announced the next one yet. So maybe at reInvent, we may find out when the next one is. If you do want to still keep the conversation going.
Or is there one?
If you still want to keep the conversation going, obviously, we will be having office hours next week where we'll talk about this, but also about what happened at Google Cloud Security Summit. I don't know what it's called, Google Cloud Security. And also there will be the Cloud Security newsletter that'll be going out on Monday with the updates from here and also from Google Cloud. So if you haven't subscribed to that, that may be a good addition to your inbox.
Awesome.
That's pretty much everything.
Thank you for everyone joining the team at live stream on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and also thank you for everyone, including Roderick, who joined the cloudsecurity.newsletter.com page to get updated on their latest cloud security news from around the world. Thank you so much, everyone. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or just reach out to us. But looking forward to having more conversations like these in our next episode, which is the AWS Security Month, which will continue with a lot more people who are speakers and solving interesting AWS security problems.
Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. All right.
See ya.
See you. Bye.